All right, we're here with Wulf Moon, known as Moon, and he is a winner for Writers of the Future, Volume 35. Congratulations on your win.
Thank you, Emily, and thank you for having me.
Absolutely. We're very happy to have you here. So tell me, when did you start writing?
When I was a little kid, I wrote poems. My parents were divorced, so I wrote poems to my dad and lived with my mom. And I started really writing. Well, I could read and write before kindergarten. I mean, I was that much into it. So, and I remember I had problems with my legs, and I had corrective casts, and a little girl would come over, and I would read her from the dinosaur book all of the Latin names, and she was like, "How do you do that?" And I said, "You just read them." And she'd like, "How do you do that?" So it was like I had this magic power. I could read dinosaur names to her, and she just loved it. So.
Wow, that's awesome.
And then when I was 15, I guess I should tell you that, then I really started entering contests. And I won the Scholastic Art and Writing Awards. It's a national contest. It's the contest that first discovered Stephen King, Peter S. Beagle, Joyce Carol Oates, John Updike. And after winning that, I had my first professional sale because I sold my story to Science World. And so that's where all of a sudden I started sending to lots of different contests, and I won a lot of pretty much every contest I entered. So
good for you.
So that really told me I'm a writer.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Great. Okay, and then so what pitfalls have you had to overcome to reach your dream?
Well, I was living in a foster home, and unfortunately got involved in drugs and ended up in a hospital. And to change my life, I said, I'm not going to keep going here where all these people were that were pulling me into that. So I signed away my scholarships. I had full scholarships to a private college because of my writing and my speaking. I'd won a lot of awards in debate and forensics. And so I signed all that away to get out of that environment. I took all my trophies, and I burnt all my certificates, all my awards. I destroyed everything so I wouldn't go back. It's kind of like burning your bridges behind you, so that I wouldn't return to where I was. It was drastic, but it's what I needed to do to change my life. And after 10 years, I said, I think I'm going to be okay. And I had to, because I remember standing in a closet crying because I had to write, but I didn't want my wife to see me. And it's like, I think I can handle it now. I think I won't go off the deep end again. And so I began starting to write, and then they held the Nebula Awards in Eugene, Oregon in 1994. And I walked in, and the first person I met was Dean Wesley Smith. He shook my hand. He said, "You're from Eugene?" I said, "Yeah." And he said, "So am I." He said, "What have you written?" And he said, "What did they pay you?" And right away he went, "That's a professional sale. You're a published writer." Because I had that sale when I was 15 to Scholastic Science World, which went out to 500,000 per issue. So it was a big sale. But I didn't think too much of it because I'd done it as a kid. Mm-hmm. And he said, "No," he said, "that's a professional sale." So for the rest of the Nebula Awards, I had Dean Wesley Smith taking me to everybody saying, "Have you met Moon? He's a professional writer. He's a published writer. He's a published writer." Tim Powers I met there too, and Serena. And that's how he introduced me to everyone. I was embarrassed and totally red-faced, but by the end I realized selling a story professionally is a big deal. I should continue on with this because Dean made me believe it was a big deal. And so he introduced me to the Wordos workshop that's there in Eugene. I met Jerry Oltian and Nina Creaky Hoffman, Bruce Holland Rogers. And so they were all submitting all these ones. Many of them had won Writers of the Future in the workshop, and many of them were submitting and about to win. And so that's where I really started getting back involved in writing again. That was 25 years ago. So I've been entering this contest for 25 years, Emily.
Wow.
By off and on, I mean usually every year I would have a submission. So, but then something changed that really made me say I was going to make sure I won this contest.
You were persistent that whole time.
Yeah,
How many times did you enter?
More than I can count. More than I can count, seriously. I quit counting certificate awards at like 20. I've got lots. I'm creative type. I'm not good at record keeping, but I know it was at least 20. Wow. But 4 years ago, when we hit the recession, we lost our business and we lost our house. My wife had cancer. She went through surgeries and treatments. And so everything had sunk way down our life. And, I kept trying to get to a spot where our life would be at ease so I could write, and I realized that's never going to happen. So instead, why don't I just say I'll write whatever I can and have a goal of what would be my goal? And it was, well, why don't I enter Writers of the Future every single quarter and make sure I never miss a quarter? And so 4 years ago, I said, that's what I'm doing. And of the 15 times I entered, 14 times with David Farland, I got a certificate of honorable mention to semifinalist. And then the last time was my winner at Q4.
Wow. Good for you.
Thanks.
We're glad that you entered.
Thanks.
And how did you hear about Writers of the Future the first time?
That was in Eugene, going into the bookstore and seeing the early volumes. I saw them there, but also it really got impressed that when I saw like Dean Wesley Smith and Chris Rush, how it had launched their careers. It really impressed me that this is how you do it. If you win this contest, you will get a platform to expand from and grow into a best-selling author if you can use it right. So that was always my goal, to do it that way. It took me a lot longer than I expected, but it's okay. I write long, and so I've had to learn to write short. That was Katie Wentworth's advice to me, write shorter. So I did, and that's finally what helped me start winning. So.
Fantastic. And tell me about your story.
Super Duper Moon Girl and the Amazing Moon Dawdler. Okay, so the title is a hook in itself.
It is.
If you write a crazy title like that, you better have a good story. But actually where it began is I wrote that title because Moon Dawdler was actually a little toy that my grandmother had made me. I told you earlier that I'd lived with her. She was Native American. Well, we didn't have much money, but she took this, upholstered this little creature, and it had these springs with eye stalks on it and a spring tail and wheels and a chain, and I would wheel it around and it would wobble like this with these star rubber tube inner tube eyes. It would squeak going as it would come as I'd wheel it around. And so Moon Dawdler is always there. And then I was writing this story about a girl on the moon, and just her Robodog companion, it was Moon Dawdler. That's what it had to be. So, but where the story came from, because the story is about a disabled girl on the moon with a walking, talking life support system that's also her friend, and where that's the genesis of that idea was I was watching videos on Facebook. And there was a photographer who was donating his time to set up kids in superhero costumes, take their picture, and then he'd do reveals in their living room. And the moms would point to the photo when it was, the poster when it was revealed. And here were these little kids that had all these disabilities and these strong stances and powerful scenes. And they would look and say, "That's you." And I remember looking at that going, that would totally change a disabled child's life, to re-envision that they don't have to feel like their disability can keep them from reaching their dreams. And so this story is actually kind of, that was the genesis of it in the back of my mind. So.
Yeah, I mean, the little girl in your story is she's what you would call an influencer. She was a little role model.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so how the story got written, it was one of those bad quarters where my wife wasn't doing well. I said, I got to have the last 2 days of the quarter. And that was the last end of the quarter, end of the year. And she said, okay. And I said, now I got to figure out what to write. She said, well, you wrote one page about that girl on the moon. What's that story? Because I'd showed her this one little page intro with the title. And I said, okay, I'll write that. And so I had half of a day, the day before the end of the contest, and I wrote 1,000 words figuring it out. And then the next day I wrote till 11:45. And I wrote 5,000 words, which was the last day of the contest. And at 11:15, I handed it to my wife. I said, I got to eat something. Can you see if I made any typos? I don't even know if this thing flows together or not. And I quick handed it to her, and I went and got something. I came back in. It was 11:45, and Jules was bawling. And I looked at her, and I just started laughing hysterically. I went, ha, ha, ha. And she looked at me, and she goes, why are you laughing? She said, I'm crying. And I said, because it worked. And I grabbed it from her. I ran back into the room. I caught the typos, hoped everything worked together, and I hit submit, and the portal said 11:56 p.m. So I just made it with 4 minutes to spare.
Right on.
So, and that was my winner. So
Yes, it certainly was a winner, and
Thank
now
you.
it's being published.
yes, I'm very happy about that.
Awesome. So now, what would you say is the underlying message of your story?
The message is, do not let anything disable you from your dreams. That really is it. So I didn't really write it with the message, except I told you what the foundation pieces of it were, so that moved me very deeply. I was crying with those moms when I watched that video, and I thought it made a deep impression on me. And so I knew that was there as I was writing the story, and I don't want to give any reveals. So, but that message was, you don't have to let disability, because I have disability, but you don't have to let disability keep you from. You can work around it, fight through it, find ways so you can still accomplish things that will make you very happy.
That's a great message. All right, so tell me about the Writers of the Future book, and what would a reader expect to find in the book, and why would you recommend it?
People are working their hardest to write stories to get into that book. So you have the best that creative minds can come together with. And they're like me. I mean, you were throwing your best at it. You're studying everything. You're studying what's been written in previous volumes. You're studying writing, and you have your own creative ideas. And so you're working on it. So when a story finally does meet the standards of the judges, it's a good story. It's not like somebody is just throwing something out there. They've worked very, very hard on it. And nobody knows. When you hear, I've been working on it for 25 years, you know, this story hopefully will really move people, because I've been trying for a long time to hit that perfect spot. And that takes reading, that takes writing, that takes studying and learning from the masters. And you'll find that the judges of this contest are the masters. They are the best people in the industry that you could ever go to and talk to and learn from. Well, until you win the contest, it gets kind of hard to do that. But their words are in articles inside of each book, and you can read them and find out a lot about writing. And you also find out what they consider as good writing, because here it is published in the Writers of the Future anthologies. So it's not only a great way to read some great stories, but it's also a great way to learn how to write. And there are articles that are focused on that very thing.
Yeah, and lucky you. You're going to spend a week with them now.
Yes, that's the reality. So the dream has become reality.
It's fantastic. Okay, so this year we have a discussion guide for reading groups and a high school unit plan. Why would you recommend Writers of the Future to these audiences?
Well, Writers of the Future is a dream realized for writers. And so when you're young, you're trying to figure out, what do I do? I think I would be good at this. Well, yes. You know, like I said, I was published at 15 professionally. So reading the book, reading the articles can actually help give you that initial seed that'll sprout into something that can become a career, can become a mighty tree. And you'll find some of these stories, and I'm reading volume 3 right now, and there's this story by this guy named David Farland, and something about paradise, and they're thinking as you read it that he's got this novel written that might be something good. And sure enough, here he is, not only with a best-selling author, but he's now a judge of the contest. Well, he began, his start started with Writers of the Future. So for young people in high school, junior high, as you're trying to figure out, what can I do with my abilities? Well, read the volumes, and you'll start believing, because you see the reality of other people that believed what they accomplished.
Now, Dave said that you tricked him. What did he mean by that?
I tricked him because he said, of course, it's a blind contest. Nobody knows who's written these stories. So I have a story about a girl on the moon, and there's no author's name to give away who you are. So he said, I thought for certain this story was written by a woman. So
I see.
he said it was so it hit all. It means I did my job right. You should be. I mean, they say write what you know, but in this case, it's also I know a lot of women, and my wife too, and I have a little niece. That was one of my tricks. I have a little niece, and she's very much like that, full of spunk, and so. As long as I knew as I was kind of emulating that, she's a little bit younger, but make her a little bit older, I knew I'd do it. And obviously, I tricked Dave. He thought he was buying a woman's story, and that it was a feeling story from a young girl's point of view, and that's because I did my homework and I pay attention. And I did my job right. So
well,
I'm happy.
Good for you. All right, what plans do you have for your future?
I have the plans, which I've always had, is once I won Writers of the Future, then I could move on to my novelist career. And I actually won a different contest, Star Trek Strange New Worlds, that Dean Wesley Smith was editor of. And I had written, after that, a Star Trek novel, and Don Moss was a friend of mine, and I said, Don, I pitched it to John Ordover at Pocket Books, and I was wondering if you would represent me on it. He said, sure. He said, but I got to warn you, they probably won't buy it because they have their own authors that they're already working with. But he still did it for me. And he was right, didn't buy it. But we became friends. And then I had a lot of life issues happen, as I've told you some of them. But 4 years ago when I started writing again and had some work behind me, I said I'm going to go back to Don and talk to him about this again. So I saw Don. I specifically targeted the Superstars writing seminars and applied for a scholarship and won the scholarship. So I got to go to Superstars in February, and I knew Don was there. Went and had lunch with him, and I talked to Don about what I'm working on presently. And Don all of a sudden stopped and he said, Moon, he said, I've never heard of anything like this. He said, in all my years, I've never heard of anything like this. And he said, send me this, send me anything you're working on at any level of development, which normally it has to be finished novel before they'll ever ask you, and especially Don Moss. He said, anything you have, he said, send it to me. Wow. And it was totally sincere. And I said, thank you. And then I went from there to see Steve he's the vice president of Audible. And I went and had my pitch session with him, and I told him what I was working on. All of a sudden he leaned back in his chair and he looked at me, he said, Moon, he said, I'd like to think in my line of work, I have read a lot of novels. He said, I have never heard of anything like this. And then he said it all over again. And he said, since you're working with Don, I'll go through him. And I'm going to meet with him at dinner tonight, and we're going to talk about producing this. So anyway, so that's where it's at. But anyway, it looks like I have not only some good novel ideas, but I have some people saying they've never heard of anything like it. I'm very happy about that.
We're very happy for you.
Thank you.
All right. So if somebody wants to find your work, or do you have a website or somewhere that they could go?
Yes, driftweave.com. Driftweave, driftweave.com, and you'll find I'm an editor at Future Science Fiction Digest. I do podcasts there. I've done a lot of podcasts of my own works for Third Flatiron Publishing, and I also won the Critters annual Reader's Choice Awards for Best Science Fiction and Fantasy Story of 2018. 2,000 people voted in the Critters Awards, so it's a big deal. And that was for my story War Dog, which was published by Third Flatiron as well. So I've had some, if you go to my website, you'll see those things and you can go check it out.
Awesome. Okay, thank you so much for coming by today, Wulf Moon. And congratulations on your win, and we will be seeing more of you soon.
Thank you, Emily. Very happy to be here.
Great.